Howdy and welcome to LeeReads, where I talk about the books I've been reading and enjoying lately. Recently, I have found myself being a little indecisive when it comes to picking up books that are the conclusions of series. I'm in a couple of different ones right now, all of which I'm really interested in and want to finish. And I think about picking one up and I'm like, no, but there's this other series. And then of course, there's a new release or an e-arc. I get very distracted. It's great to have options, but I sat down and I thought about 5 fantasy series that I really want to focus on finishing or making good progress on for the rest of this year. I have a duology, a trilogy, a quartet, a 6-book, and a 7-book. So we're going to go shortest to longest. Beginning with a series that I think is really underrated. I've really not seen anyone else on BookTube talking about this series, and I've been quite enjoying it. It has a very different feel. The Blacklands Bane duology, starting with A Flame in the North, and the second book, the one that I'm currently reading, is The Fall of Waterstone. This is an epic adult fantasy duology that is Norse inspired. The standout thing to me about this duology is it feels so much like The Lord of the Rings. I'm not saying that the story is the same and the characters are the same, but I feel as though the author must have been very inspired by The Lord of the Rings and how Tolkien writes and the naming conventions. And I haven't read this in any author's note or anywhere, so I could be totally off base, but it feels so familiar. It feels like that mythical, lyrical, kind of lore-heavy feeling that you get when you're reading The Lord of the Rings, but the story is different. It follows this woman who is highly prized within the kin that she comes from because she has this type of magic, and she is guarded by a shield maiden, essentially. And when this woman's brother makes a horrible mistake and offends some northerners that were traveling to the area, she basically gets sent off with them as a weregild. It's an honor thing, like she has to go with them for a year and a day. They end up taking her north, but it's not as simple as that at all, because these are not normal people. One of them may be of a slightly different race, and they think that someone with her abilities might help them win this battle against the ancient evil. So you can see how it feels similar to Lord of the Rings in that sense. This is really giving me those vibes. The next is a trilogy, and it's one I've spoken of recently. Rook and Rose, beginning with Mask of Mirrors, followed by The Liar's Knot, and then Labyrinth's Heart. I know, I read the first 2 books in the trilogy within 1 month, and last month I meant to finish the last one, and I just haven't yet because I'm kind of nervous. So I started it, and then, a situation happened. One conflict I knew would have to be resolved in this book, and it's starting to rear its head, and so I got a little nervous and put it down, which is silly because I really want to know what happens, and I've heard that the trilogy is concluded rather well. This is an adult political fantasy that is set in a Venetian-inspired world. It deals with themes of colonization and feeling like you don't fit in well in your world for various reasons. Follows the main character, who is a con artist. She grew up on the streets of this town, and now she's come back. She's trying to pose as a noble person and regain her place in that house, but that house is on the downfall and isn't quite sure she is who she says she is. There are some political maneuverings, rising dark tidings from the magic, and just an interesting interweaving of various conflicts between the main trio of characters, and then how they interact with this masked vigilante who just wants to save the city. It's a very complex trilogy. There's like 2 different magic systems going on. One that was brought in with kind of the colonizing people, and one that is more inherent to this city and its religion. The characters are very well done, especially because there's so much like trickery and lies and false personas and hidden identities going on. It's a lot to keep track of, and the author's done a great job with it. Why haven't I finished it yet? I don't know. Maybe I just don't want it to be over. Next, the Quartet, another hefty one. We have the Diviners series. Starting with the Diviners, I mean, these are pretty hefty books. I've read the first 2. The Diviners and Layer of Dreams. Next is Before the Devil Breaks You, and then The King of Crows. This is a young adult contemporary fantasy set in Manhattan in the 1920s, where a group of individuals have been manifesting various abilities, and they are essentially brought together to deal with some evilness arising in the city. Between books 1 and 2, we followed a main group of characters, and then we got to know more in book 2. The general plot is expanding, but in the first 2 books it's somewhat episodic in that, like, the criminal that they're trying to catch, the kind of occult murder, is dealt with in each book. But why is it all happening? Why do they have these abilities? We have a lot of questions to answer. I'm very intrigued. Halfway done with the Quartet. I'm primarily listening to them on audiobook, but enjoyed them so much that I went out and got the physical copy. The next series is one that has been on my series list for a couple of years now. The Legends of the First Empire. I haven't read Rivera Revelations, which is a series that takes place thousands of years later. This is really forming those legends and those gods that you learn about in those later books. This feels like comfortable traditional fantasy where you have an elf-like species that are considered gods by the humans. The human society has long been kind of oppressed and controlled by these godlike creatures. They're very tribal, close-knit kin, and that all starts to unravel as kind of they begin to rebel and go to war against the people who are oppressing them, and political factions within those elf-like people are also kind of riling things up to their own ends. So I think I've read book 3, and there's 6 books in the series, kind of like the first half and the second half. The thing that makes me so motivated to read this is based on the reactions and the reviews of other people. People have gotten very, very attached to the characters, and they are very unique and interesting characters. And essentially you're following various of these humans as they are growing, making advancements, getting themselves, I suppose, in a position that they're going to become legends. And this is how the story really happened. Then maybe one day after I finish this series, I will go on to read the rest of Michael Sullivan's world. And the last one, the longest. The first book in the series I read back in high school. It was actually one of the first real adult epic fantasy stories that I read when I was coming out of just reading Star Wars Expanded Universe all the time. I still haven't finished the series because, it brings you through it. The Crown of Stars by Kate Elliott. 7-book series. I've been collecting them over the years. King's Dragon was one of my favorite books for the longest time. King's Dragon being the first one, and I originally picked it up because of the cover. The King's Dragon is kind of a position. How to explain The Crown of Stars? It's epic fantasy. It's somewhat political. The way that Kate Elliott weaves together the magic and the plot, it's a 7-book series, and it seems slow at times, and at times you wonder, like, why are we getting perspectives from this character? But even only halfway through the series, like, you can see how it's weaving together, and it's just so well thought out and well done and really impactful. It makes the reveals hit you that much harder. This country is torn by internal conflict, and basically 2 orphans get thrust into the middle of it on either side of the war. One has somewhat been abused, and she becomes a king's messenger, and that introduces her to the court of the king. The other was sworn to the church and starts out in a monastery. He doesn't stay there very long, and he sort of gets introduced to the court of the rebellious faction, the sister of the king who feels that she should be in charge. And through their perspectives, you see the story unfold. It deals with, there's magic, there's invaders who may not be human. They are almost like pawns from 2 opposing ethereal other types of beings that are, placing people on the board to be used as pieces in their grand schemes that we don't fully understand. So it is a very expansive story, and yet it feels like that classic epic fantasy where you have mounted knights and sieges of castles and the king's caravan moving across the city and all of the politics that has to do with that. The religion and the magic are all wound up in it. If you like Kate Elliott, if you like epic fantasy, very well done, complicated plots and magic systems, and yes, you really should give The Crown of Stars a try. It's been out for a while and it's generally readily available in libraries and at used bookstores. That said, when am I going to finish it? I need to, and that's why I'm putting it on this list. So those are 5 fantasy series that I'm going to be focusing on in the near future. What are your series reading goals? What series are you really wanting to finish, especially ones that are completed and you just haven't gotten to them yet? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. And can you hear the kittens playing? They are ripping up packing paper. Packing paper in a box is the best toy. As always, don't forget to support your local library. Thanks.